You were a child once. You went to school, sat in rows, moved through a timetable someone else designed, and were told roughly what to learn and when to learn it. That felt completely normal, because it is normal now, but for almost the entire span of human existence. Nobody scheduled a child's day, not a single hour of it. No classrooms, no curriculum, no structured activities, and what children did instead, completely unsupervised and unstructured for the vast majority of every day, turns out to be so different from anything we currently recognize as childhood that researchers who study it describe it as an entirely separate phenomenon, one that our brains may still be wired for, and one that we dismantled so quietly and so recently that most of us never noticed it was gone. Let's start with what free actually looked like. For the first 300,000 years of our species' existence, there were no schools, no organised sports, no Tuesday afternoon piano lessons. But this wasn't a gap in civilization waiting to be filled. It was a complete system, running exactly as intended. Anthropologist David Lancey at Utah State University has spent decades cataloguing childhood across hunter-gatherer and subsistence farming societies, the groups that most closely mirror the conditions our ancestors lived in. He calls the result the weird paradox. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic societies are the global outlier, not the standard, the exception. In most traditional societies Lancey studied, children were not taught. They were observers. From infancy, babies were carried continuously, positioned to face outward toward the world rather than inward toward a caregiver's chest. By the time they could walk, they weren't handed age-appropriate toys. They were handed whatever adults were actually using. Real tools, real materials, real fire in some cases, under relaxed supervision that would make a modern parent briefly lose consciousness. What happened next is the part that surprises people. The children just figured it out. Nobody taught them, nobody corrected them. They watched, they copied, they failed privately, and they tried again. Researchers call this observational learning, and it's extraordinarily efficient. A child in a traditional Mayan farming community in Guatemala, studied by developmental psychologist Maricela Correa Chavez at California State University, could replicate complex weaving patterns after a single observation, not because they were exceptional, but because sustained, quiet, uninterrupted watching had trained their attention in a way that structured instruction simply doesn't. Here's what that means. The children weren't idle. They were busy learning everything. But here's where it gets strange. The activity that fills the largest portion of an ancient child's day isn't work, it's play, but not the kind you're picturing. Developmental psychologist Peter Gray at Boston College has argued for years that the play ancient children engaged in was categorically different from modern play, and not in the direction we assume. We tend to think of historical childhood as harder, more chores, more responsibility, more graft. And there was some of that, but the actual dominant activity, day after day, was what Gray calls free-age mixed play. Groups of children ranging from toddlers to teenagers, left entirely alone, inventing their own games, setting their own rules, resolving their own conflicts, without any adult anywhere nearby. This is the part that has no modern equivalent. In contemporary Western life, when children play together, they are almost always sorted by age. 5-year-olds with 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds with 10-year-olds, adults are present, refereeing, facilitating, redirecting. The play has a schedule, it has a venue, it has, often, a goal. None of that existed. Ancient children played in bands that spanned 8 or 9 years of age because that was who was available. And the effect this had on development was profound. The older children weren't just playing, they were incidentally teaching, moderating their strength, simplifying explanations, taking on responsibility for younger kids without being asked to. The younger children weren't just playing either. They were being apprenticed, silently, into social competence, how to negotiate, how to lose, how to re-enter a group after a conflict. Skills that take years to learn in an adult-structured environment, and that ancient children absorbed continuously, daily, without a curriculum in sight. Gray documented this across multiple modern hunter-gatherer groups, including the Kung San of the Kalahari and the Inuit communities of northern Canada. In every case, the pattern held. Hours of unsupervised, age-mixed, self-directed play. No adult intervention unless someone was actually bleeding. One study he cites found that children in these environments spent an average of 6 to 8 hours a day in this kind of play. 6 to 8 hours. That's more time than most adults spend at work. And nobody organised it. Nobody showed up and said, right, it's play time. It just happened. Every day. Because the conditions existed for it to happen. The uncomfortable fact is this. The thing that most looks like doing nothing is the thing that was doing the most. And not only that, but there's an assumption baked into modern childhood that children need protection from boredom, that an unoccupied child is a problem to be solved. We fill the gaps. After-school clubs, organised play dates, enrichment apps. Because empty time feels like wasted time. Ancient children were bored constantly, and it turns out that was the point. Psychologist Stuart Brown, founder of the National Institute for Play in California, has spent decades studying what happens when mammals, including humans, are deprived of unstructured time. His findings are not subtle. Play deprivation in early life doesn't just make children less happy, it physically alters brain development. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and social judgment, develops in direct response to the kind of unscripted, consequence-real interactions that free play provides. You can't replicate this in a classroom. You can't replicate it with a structured activity. The brain is waiting for something specific, and it has been waiting for 300,000 years. But here's the thing that reframes everything. Ancient children weren't just passively benefiting from boredom, they were actively using it. Anthropologists observing children in traditional societies consistently report the same thing. When left alone with nothing to do, children don't stare at the sky. Within minutes, they are building, testing, experimenting, arguing, constructing entire social worlds from available materials: mud, sticks, each other. The boredom doesn't last because the mind, particularly the young mind, is extraordinarily good at solving it. What looks like nothing is the brain generating its own curriculum. Researchers at the University of Melbourne, studying play behaviour in Indigenous Australian communities, found that children as young as 3 were engaging in what they termed purposeful risk, climbing things they might fall from, handling tools they might cut themselves with, navigating social hierarchies they might get hurt by. Not because adults were negligent, because adults understood, implicitly, that this was how competence was built. You didn't tell a child how to assess risk, you let them accumulate small injuries and recalibrate. The slightly uncomfortable implication is that the safest childhoods in human history may have produced the least capable adults, not because the children were unloved, because they were never allowed to be usefully afraid. And then everything changed. For almost all of human history, childhood looked more or less the same. Then, in a very short window, roughly the last 150 years, it transformed beyond recognition. Compulsory schooling arrived in most Western countries in the second half of the 19th century. Britain's Elementary Education Act, 1870. In the United States, Massachusetts had mandated school attendance as early as 1852. The intention was reasonable: literacy, opportunity, social mobility. What nobody fully accounted for was what would be displaced. The hours that ancient children had spent in free, unsupervised, age-mixed play didn't get replaced by something equivalent. They got replaced by sitting, by instruction, by age-segregated cohorts moving through identical material in identical rooms under continuous adult supervision. The outdoor bands dissolved. The older children stopped mentoring the younger ones because they were never in the same room anymore. The self-directed problem-solving was replaced by problems that already had answers, handed to you by someone standing at the front. Peter Gray draws a direct line between this shift and the mental health data that emerges from the same period and accelerates through the 20th century. Rates of anxiety, depression, and what clinicians call external locus of control, the feeling that your life is controlled by forces outside yourself, have risen in almost perfect correlation with the decline of free play and the rise of structured childhood. He's careful to say correlation isn't causation, but he's also not that careful about it. In 1960, psychologists administering standardized mental health surveys to American college students recorded certain baseline scores. By 2007, the average college student scored higher on anxiety and lower on autonomy than 85% of students from 1960. Same surveys, very different children. What changed wasn't the world. The world got objectively safer and more comfortable. What changed was how much of childhood was spent doing things that children chose themselves, and that number went, across the developed world, almost to 0. The children didn't notice the trade happening. They were in school. So the next time you watch a child negotiate a screen time limit, or sit through a lesson they didn't choose, or wait to be told what to do next, you're watching something genuinely new in human history. Not an improvement on what came before, just a different experiment still running, results still coming in. The ancient child woke up with no schedule, wandered into a group of kids ranging from toddlers to teenagers, spent the day building, failing, watching, copying, falling out of trees, falling out with friends and figuring out how to repair both. Nobody assessed them. Nobody optimized them. Nobody worried that they weren't reaching their potential. And by almost every developmental measure we now have, they were fine. More than fine.